Why was everyone staring at her boots? They weren't polished to parade shine, only dusted with the red powder that clung to everything in these mountains. Maybe it wasn't the boots. Maybe it was her. The way she stepped off the transport like she'd been here before. The way her eyes swept the horizon as if they already knew where the threats were hiding. The whispers started before she even cleared the ramp. Too small. Looks like somebody's grandmother. Wrong war, wrong place. She carried one duffel, balanced easily on her shoulder. No name tapes, no unit patch, just a uniform that hung loose on a frame that looked more suited for a library desk than a battlefield. The soldiers waiting at the forward operating base sized her up the way predators size up prey, quickly, cruelly, with that half-hidden smirk that said they'd already judged her. And maybe they were right. On the surface, Lara Vance looked out of place. A logistics analyst, they'd said, retired. A woman with fine lines etched around her eyes, walking into a world built for the young, the loud, the iron-blooded. She ignored them. She had been ignoring them for 40 years. The air tasted of iron and grit. She let it fill her lungs, measured it the way she measured everything. The base smelled tired. Its walls sagged in places. The concertina wire on the western edge drooped like an afterthought. A private shifted on his heels at the gate, nervous, distracted. Even the generators carried their secrets, the cough of a bad bearing, the wheeze of poor maintenance. This wasn't a fortress. It was a patient on life support, and she could already hear the heartbeat. She walked through it all with steady steps. Her eyes didn't flinch from the stairs. Every environment had its rhythm. She just needed to learn the cadence of this one. Inside her duffel, 3 sets of clothes, a battered copy of Marcus Aurelius, and a small oiled whetstone. Spartan efficiency. The essentials of her life had never been things you could weigh. A sergeant intercepted her. His chest puffed, arms flexed beneath his sleeves like he wanted her to notice. His nameplate read Thorn. He pointed with his chin, the way a man points at something he doesn't respect. Colonel's waiting, try to keep up. She followed him through a dust storm of sideways glances. The mess of smells, sweat, oil, burned rations hung thick in the air. Soldiers bent over laptops, radios, and maps, talking in clipped sentences. It was a world pulsing with tension. Screens hummed. Radios spat. Colonel Madsen didn't look up right away when she entered. He stood bent over a glowing map table, jaw tight, eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. When he did finally straighten, his gaze crawled over her with disbelief. Vance, logistics analyst, retired, he read off the file, his lip curling at the word retired. She didn't move, didn't fidget, hands clasped behind her back as if she'd been standing at attention for a lifetime. With all due respect, Madsen said, what I need are shooters and engineers, trigger pullers, techs, not another pair of hands to count bullets. This isn't a boardroom, it's a war. His words hung heavy. Thorne smirked near the doorway, muttering to another soldier, she'll get lost behind a supply crate. The insult was sharp, but to her it was air, weightless. She had lived a lifetime beneath such words. The posting was for a strategic logistics consultant, she answered quietly. Her voice didn't rise. It cut through the hum of the room all the same. Madsen scoffed. Strategic. Strategic is keeping drones in the air and fuel in the tanks, not theory. He waved her toward the far corner of the operations center. A forgotten desk beside the server racks, their heat radiating like punishment. That's you, monitor supply feeds. Write a report, keep busy. It was a dismissal, furniture placement. She gave a single nod, understood. The chair creaked, the screen flickered, the keyboard stuck on the shift key. Around her, soldiers moved like a tide, but she was on an island. She powered on the terminal, ignored the chuckles behind her, and began to type. To them it was make work, to her it was a window. Fuel logs, ammunition requests, medical supply manifests. They thought it was busy work, but she didn't just see numbers. She saw patterns, like cracks spreading under the surface of ice. The drones consumed 7% more fuel than they should have, a sign of an engine problem no one had caught. Units were hoarding ammunition, a quiet rebellion that spoke louder than words. Medical requests showed not trauma kits but antacids, bad water, bad food. She walked the base in silence, twice a day, dawn and dusk, not to gawk at the mountains but to see the base through the enemy's eyes. Blind spots in the cameras, predictable patrol cycles, a depression near a watchtower where a mine could be hidden. She cataloged it all. And when she spoke, she didn't talk of battles or glory. She spoke of boots. To a nervous private cleaning his rifle, she said, file down the heel. Uneven wear throws off your balance. To a mechanic cursing at a dead radio array, she pointed to the wire behind the heatsink. It's not in the schematics. It always phrased there. Little things, forgettable things, except they were. They were proof, seeds, quiet corrections that changed everything. The base didn't notice her, not really. She faded into background noise, that was fine. Ghosts could see what others missed. But the mountains were waiting. Late one afternoon, the sky turned sickly yellow. The wind sharpened. Veterans sniffed the air, their faces hardening. The storm was coming. Sand and dust swallowed the horizon. The world became a wall of noise, aircraft grounded, electronics faltering, and then the comms feed dissolved into static. "We're being jammed," an analyst shouted. Screens flickered red. Radios shrieked with a precise, piercing signal, not brute force, surgical. Someone was cutting their eyes and ears at the same time. Colonel Madsen barked orders. Analysts scrambled. Thorne prowled the room like a caged animal. Panic thickened the air. And in the corner, she closed her eyes. The noise was not random. It pulsed. It breathed. It was too clean, too familiar. Her eyes opened, calm. She stood, walked through the storm of panic to the console, placed a hand on the young lieutenant's shoulder. "Stop," she said. The word was soft, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. Her fingers flew, not over the modern interface, but command lines buried deep in legacy code. The screen shifted to blocky text. "It's not just jamming you," she murmured. "It's learning, 12-second intervals. They're testing our response, listening to us panic." The room stilled. She turned to Madsen. "It's a distraction. They're coming for the western fence. Sector Gamma, 30-meter blind spot. Patrols are predictable. They're probably at the wire now." Thorne laughed, sharp and hollow. "All this from counting spare parts." She didn't even look at him. "Your drones burn too much fuel. Your purifiers need filters. Your men hoard ammunition because they don't trust the chain. This fence is just another failure in the list." The air left the room. It wasn't a boast, it was a dismantling, quiet, surgical. Madsen hesitated, then snapped. "Thorne, fire team, Sector Gamma now." The sergeant faltered but obeyed. 2 minutes stretched into eternity, silence. Then the radio crackled. "Contact, Sector Gamma. Hostiles cutting the wire, engaged, threat neutralized." Relief swept the room. Every head turned to her. She hadn't moved, still watching her monitor, the tiny red dot where she knew they'd appear. Not too small, not too old, something else entirely. The storm raged outside, but in the operations center it was quiet, too quiet. Because they all understood, something had shifted. The ghost in the corner had seen what no one else could, and the war had just changed. She didn't look like a rescuer. Not when she stood in the corner of the tactical map room, eyes tracing lines no one else could see. Not when Colonel Madsen's voice, tight with strain, filled the air. "Bravo 3 is missing. 4 soldiers. Gone silent north of the relay station, swallowed by the ravines the locals called the Serpent's Teeth." The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed pale and raw. But inside the base, the silence after the storm was heavier than the roar of sand and wind had been. Radios crackled with static. Screens showed empty terrain. And on the map, a single faint blip pulsed from Corporal Rossi's locator, weak and lonely, 2 clicks north. "They're drawing us into a killing field," Sergeant Thorne muttered, staring at the jagged lines of the ravines. His arrogance had drained with the storm. In its place was something sharper: fear, respect. Madsen paced, his jaw clenching. A medevac would be suicide, a ground convoy even worse. Every route in was predictable, exposed. And then his eyes drifted to her. She didn't look back immediately. Her finger traced erosion lines on the satellite image. She wasn't seeing terrain. She was reading it the way others read a book. Shadows, channels, places where wind carved paths no drone could map. "The main road is death," she said quietly. "So is the southern approach. They'll have the high ground zeroed." She turned her screen, showing a faint thread of goat tracks and dry streambeds weaving like veins under the ridgeline. "They won't be looking behind them." The room leaned closer. This fissure, almost invisible, not on the maps, impassable for a squad but not impossible for 4. It bypasses the sniper's sight lanes. Brings you out 100 meters behind Bravo 3's last position. Long, hard, silent, but possible. Thorne's jaw worked. "That's a trap, one rock slide in." "Every route is a risk," she cut in. "This is the one they won't expect." Her calm voice silenced him. Madsen stared at her. This was the second test, not defense, offense, to save lives. "Can you lead it?" he asked. It wasn't a question of planning, it was command. She didn't hesitate. "I can." Silence. Heavy. A woman they dismissed as furniture had just volunteered to lead a rescue into the most hostile ground in the valley. "She'll need an escort," Thorne broke in, the protest more protective than mocking now. "A small team," she replied. 4, no more. Stealth is our only advantage. We need speed, silence, and trust." Her eyes swept the room. She didn't choose the strongest or the most decorated. She chose those who could listen. Private Tanaka, quiet, observant, the one she'd spoken to about his boots. Corporal Rossi, resourceful, a comms tech who could make broken machines breathe again. And one shooter, someone who knew how to move like a shadow. Her gaze landed on Thorne. He stiffened. For a moment his pride clashed with memory, but he understood. She was offering him a chance, to follow, to redeem. "I'll go," he said. Madsen gave the order. "Vance is in command. 20 minutes, gear up." The base exhaled, and just like that, the ghost was leading a mission. The serpent's teeth lived up to their name. Ravines twisted like scars. Rock walls towered on either side, jagged and black. The air was colder here, still and heavy. Every sound carried. Every footstep risked betrayal. She moved first, always first. Her small frame flowed over loose shale like it had been waiting for her. Rifle low, steps deliberate. Every movement belonged to the landscape. Behind her, Thorne, Rossi, and Tanaka struggled to keep the rhythm. Their gear clinked. Their breaths echoed too loud. Thorne, a hardened infantryman, found himself watching her more than the terrain. She didn't signal often, but when she did, her hand gestures were sharp, precise. The silent language of special units, not something a desk analyst should know. He didn't ask, he just followed. An hour in, she raised a fist. The team froze. She pointed at a pile of rocks 100 yards ahead. Nothing unusual until she mimed an antenna with her fingers. 2 men hidden. Thorne squinted, saw nothing, but he didn't argue. She gestured, he stayed. Tanaka flanked, she disappeared forward, silent, fluid. The seconds crawled, 30, 40. Then she reappeared, beckoning them forward. When Thorne passed the rocks, he saw them. 2 enemy fighters slumped. No gunfire, no struggle, throats cut clean, they hadn't even cried out. Tanaka's face went pale, Rossi's eyes widened. Thorne just stared at her, not an analyst, not a relic, something else. A ghost. They found Bravo 3 pinned behind an outcrop. A young soldier, Miller, bleeding from a leg wound. The others low on ammunition, exhausted. Rossi dropped beside Miller, hands steady as she clamped the wound, whispering calm words he'd never forget. She knelt by the squad leader. Snipers. 2, he rasped. That ridge, 1,000 meters. Her pale eyes lifted, shadows on the ridgeline, watching, waiting. They couldn't stay. She signaled, time to move. But fate twisted. A 4-man enemy patrol rounded the bend, no more than 50 meters away. No cover, no time. Thorne raised his rifle, finger tightening. Fire would give them away. It would be a slaughter. No, she hissed. And then she moved. The first enemy soldier froze at the sight of her. He never fired. A strike to his jaw sent him collapsing into his comrades. She dropped low, knife flashing. A thrust to the artery, precise, brutal. She pivoted, using his falling body as cover, smashing her rifle butt into another throat. The fourth raised his weapon in shock. Thorne squeezed one suppressed shot. The man fell. It was over in seconds. 4 bodies, no alarm raised. The ravine was silent again. Thorne's chest heaved. Rossi stared. Tanaka swallowed hard. She wiped her knife on a dead man's sleeve. Calm, detached, as if nothing had happened. Not a woman too small, not a mistake. Something lethal, something terrifying. The journey back was agony. Miller groaned with each step, but they carried him, slipping through shadows like phantoms. Twice they evaded patrols, crouching low as enemy boots crunched only meters above them. When the base lights finally came into view, night had fallen. They stumbled into the operations center, bone-tired, carrying Miller between them. The room fell silent. Madsen stood frozen. Beside him, a man they didn't know, a tall figure, shoulders broad beneath a general's stars. "Medic," Madsen roared. Soldiers rushed forward, lifting Miller away. Relief flickered across the colonel's face. Then respect. Something deeper than respect. But the general stepped forward, eyes locked on her. He held a tablet, swiping through a file. The redacted lines vanished as his clearance code unlocked them. And his breath caught. He looked up at her, recognition dawning. "Wraith," he whispered. The name cut through the room like lightning. The analysts froze. Thorne stiffened. Madsen blinked, confused. But the general, Michael Armitage, saw not a logistics analyst, not a relic. He saw the ghost from a past war. For the first time her expression shifted, a flicker of memory, a shared history. "It's been a long time, Michael," she said softly. The room reeled. The general, a 4-star, a man carved from granite, smiled. A small, honest smile. "Not long enough to forget who taught me how to stay alive." And then, in front of them all, he saluted her. Not as a superior officer, but as a student salutes a master. One by one, the room followed. Madsen, Thorne, Rossi, Tanaka, every soldier who had whispered, doubted, mocked. They stood, they saluted. And she, quiet, steady, small, acknowledged them with a single nod. Not asking for their respect, earning it. The ghost had returned. And the war had only just begun. Why did the base feel different the next morning? It wasn't louder. If anything, it was quieter. But it was a new kind of quiet, charged, deliberate. Soldiers moved with more purpose. Maintenance checks that had been rushed were now meticulous. Patrols that once looked casual now carried an edge, as if each step mattered. They didn't talk about her in the mess anymore. No more jokes about her size. No more whispers about her age. They didn't need to. Every soldier in the FOB had heard what happened in the ravines. They'd seen the wounded men carried back alive. They'd seen the salute. Respect had replaced rumor. She didn't sit in the corner of the operations center anymore. The flickering terminal she once worked had gone dark, its chair empty. Now she stood beside Colonel Madsen at the main tactical table, her pale eyes studying maps, her finger tracing patterns others hadn't thought to notice. Madsen listened now, really listened. "We've had reports of movement in the Curangle Pass," he said one morning, his voice more cautious than dismissive. "Standard procedure calls for an aerial sweep." Her gaze moved over the topography. She saw what the satellites didn't: the way the ridges bent light, the way shadows twisted signals. "They'll expect an aerial sweep," she said, her tone quiet, unhurried. "They'll be hidden. The pass creates thermal echoes that will mask their heat signatures." She tapped a lower ridgeline with one finger. "But a two-man observation team, inserted here at dusk, they'll see everything. The shadows will cover them. The enemy won't be looking there." Madsen nodded slowly, absorbing her words, then turned to Thorne. "Make it happen." "Yes, sir," Thorne answered, no smirk, no hesitation, just obedience. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the shift was happening. The fob was no longer running on routine. It was running on awareness. Soldiers began approaching her, quietly, carefully, as if they were students seeking out a teacher. Rossi brought her schematics for the new comms amplifier. "There's a power fluctuation I can't stabilize," Rossi admitted, eyes lowering as if embarrassed. She studied the pad, her expression unreadable. "The capacitor is overrated for the draw," she said at last. "It creates a feedback loop. Swap it for a smaller one. It'll hold." Rossi blinked, stunned. "That's it. That's it." And then Rossi walked away, her mind racing, respect growing. Later, Tanaka approached her on the perimeter. "My squad leader wants us to drill silent movement," he said, nervously adjusting his rifle sling. "The way you move, could you teach us?" Her eyes softened just slightly. "It's not about being silent," she said. "It's about being deliberate. Every step has a purpose. Every breath is controlled. Don't try to be quiet. Try to belong to the landscape. The silence will follow." Tanaka nodded, words etching themselves into his memory. She left them both with lessons, not lectures. And in that way, piece by piece, she was reshaping a base that had once dismissed her. But the mountains weren't still. At night the wind carried whispers. Sometimes it was only the echo of distant gunfire. Sometimes something more, shapes in the distance, shadows that didn't belong to rock. And always, always the silence of the enemy, waiting. She walked the perimeter as she always did, her boots brushing against the gravel, her gaze sweeping not the walls but the horizon. She didn't just see the base. She saw it as the enemy would. A weakness patched here, a blind spot shifting there, a rhythm almost corrected but not quite. The enemy would see it too. Colonel Madsen called a late briefing one evening, his face tense. Reports had filtered in of insurgent buildup beyond the pass, numbers too vague to trust, intel too scattered. "We could be looking at a large offensive," he said, "or nothing at all." The soldiers in the room shifted, weary, doubtful. They'd heard warnings before. She stood in the corner, silent, listening. Finally Madsen turned to her. His tone had none of the dismissal from days ago, only weight. "What do you see, Vance?" Her pale eyes moved over the data feeds, the maps, the thin threads of intercepted chatter. "I see patience," she said softly. The room stilled. "They're waiting. They tested our wire. They tested our comms. They tested our response in the ravines. Now they wait, because patience kills. It always has." Her words lingered, unsettling, sinking into the room like cold. No one argued. That night she stood alone on the western wall. The mountains stretched out before her, painted in fatting hues of orange and purple. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of dust and iron. She wasn't looking at the base. She was looking at the silence beyond it. She remembered other mountains, other wars. She remembered waiting, watching, calculating not if but when the strike would come. She remembered the silence before storms that no one else could hear. And for the first time since arriving, a shadow of something crossed her calm face. Not fear, not doubt. Memory. Because she had been here before, in places no one admitted soldiers had gone, watching enemies gather in the dark. And she knew what was coming. It was never the storm you saw that broke you. It was the one you thought you had survived. And fob vigilance had not survived anything yet. The next morning, the base awoke sharper, steadier, unknowingly braced for what she already knew. The enemy wasn't finished. Not by a long stretch. The test had passed, the game had begun. And she, the ghost they, once called too small, was the only one ready to play. Why did the laughter stop so suddenly in the mess hall? At first, it was just a shift in the air. Soldiers who had been joking over tin trays of rations stiffened, eyes darting toward the door. A silence spread, subtle but sharp. She entered as she always did, quietly with her tray balanced easily, her gaze neither lowered nor demanding. But respect changes things. Now men and women who had once dismissed her straightened their shoulders when she passed. Some nodded faintly, others fell silent, letting her eat undisturbed. And yet beneath that newfound reverence, something else festered. Jealousy. Not everyone at fob vigilance welcomed her presence. For some, respect meant humiliation. They had been exposed, carelessness, arrogance, blind spots laid bare by the woman they had mocked. And soldiers who lived on pride sometimes carried resentment sharper than knives. That evening, as the sky bled into black and stars fought their way through the thin mountain haze, she returned to her routine walk along the inner perimeter. It was ritual now, measuring steps, scanning shadows, listening to the hum of the fence as if it whispered secrets only she could hear. She paused near the northern tower. The ground there had always bothered her. A faint depression, the kind of place someone might lay a trap. She crouched, brushing her fingers over the earth. Loose soil, too loose. Her eyes narrowed. A shaped charge, buried shallow, wires leading toward the culvert. She knew it the way a hunter knows tracks in mud. She didn't call for a squad. She didn't shout. She simply stood and waited, her gaze fixed on the tower's guard, a young soldier, jittery, shifting weight from foot to foot. She beckoned him down. He hesitated, confused, then climbed from the platform. "Look," she said softly, pointing. His eyes widened as he knelt, following the faint glint of wire. His breath caught. "It's—" "Don't finish that sentence," she whispered. "Silence keeps you alive." She cut the line with swift, precise hands. The boy looked at her, pale, shaken. "Whoever planted this," she murmured, "knew our patrol cycle, knew this ground was weak. Someone is feeding them information." The boy's eyes darted toward the base. "You mean?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The thought was already planted in his mind. The next morning, Colonel Madsen summoned her, Thorne, and Rossi to his office. His face was grave. "We've had a leak," he said. "Intercepted chatter confirms the enemy knew Bravo 3's route before the storm. Too much detail. Someone in this base is talking." The word traitor hung in the air like a knife. Thorne stiffened. "Sir, with respect, we don't know that. Could have been drones overhead, scouts." "Scouts don't plant shaped charges under our wire," she interrupted. Madsen's eyes cut to her. He didn't argue. "The problem is trust," he said, voice heavy. "We can't afford suspicion tearing us apart." But suspicion was already blooming. That night, as the base settled into restless sleep, she sat alone at the flickering edge of a desk lamp, her battered copy of Marcus Aurelius open before her. The words were familiar, worn by years of reading. "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." She closed the book, stared at her hands. Could she afford philosophy here? Or was truth something heavier, something dangerous? She thought of the young guard's pale face, his whisper of fear, thought of the silent resentment in the eyes of certain soldiers when they saluted her. And she wondered, How long before patience became betrayal? The next blow fell during dawn briefing. An explosion rocked the motor pool. The sound tore through the compound like thunder. Dust and screams filled the air. She and Thorne sprinted through the haze, hearts hammering. A jeep lay on its side, wheels still spinning, flames licking its undercarriage. Mechanics staggered from the smoke, some bloodied, some screaming names. Sabotage, not an outside attack. Inside hands. She crouched near the blast site, her pale eyes scanning debris. The placement wasn't random. The charge had been hidden beneath the fuel drums. Whoever did it knew the layout, knew where to cut deepest. Rossi stumbled up beside her, face streaked with soot, hands shaking. The comms gear, we had a backup relay stored here, gone, destroyed. She didn't answer. Her silence was worse than words. Because in that silence, everyone knew the truth. The enemy wasn't only outside the wire. Colonel Madsen convened the command staff that evening. His voice shook with fury. "We have a traitor," he said, "and until we root them out, every life here is compromised." The room boiled with whispers, fingers pointed, arguments flared. She stood in the corner listening, watching. Thorne's voice cut through. "Who benefits from this? Who's been sidelined since she got here?" He glanced, not at her but at others, faces flushed with resentment, soldiers shifting uncomfortably. The air grew hotter. Suspicion was a fire now spreading. And she said nothing. Because silence was her weapon, and silence forced others to reveal themselves. Later in the quiet of the barracks, Rossi approached her. The young corporal's eyes were wide, her voice hushed. "Ma'am, what if it's someone close, someone we trust?" Her reply came slow, deliberate. "Trust is earned in shadows, not in words. Watch their hands, watch their silences, that's where the truth hides." Rossi swallowed hard, nodding. She looked out at the night, the mountains black against the stars. She had faced enemies in deserts, jungles, cities that didn't exist on maps. But betrayal, it was different. It was a knife from behind, a wound deeper than any bullet. And she knew this base would not survive another storm if the knife wasn't found. She whispered it to herself as she leaned against the cold concrete wall outside the TOC, eyes scanning the silent perimeter. Sometimes the battle isn't fought against the ones outside the wire. Sometimes it's fought against the shadows sitting at your own table. And in that truth lay the heaviest burden. Because even a ghost could be betrayed. Who do you trust when everyone is looking over their shoulder? The base felt different now, not just sharper but fractured. Suspicion had seeped into the cracks, colder than the mountain wind. Soldiers who once shared jokes in the mess now ate in silence, eyes darting at one another. Conversations cut off when footsteps approached. A cough, a laugh, a whisper, suddenly suspicious. And in the center of it all she walked quietly, her expression unchanged, though her eyes missed nothing. She saw the way Thorne barked orders with sharper edges now, as if shouting could drive out doubt. She saw Rossi hunched over her comms equipment longer than necessary, avoiding people's eyes. She saw Tanaka cleaning his weapon with obsessive care, a ritual born less of discipline than of fear. This was what betrayal did. It hollowed a place out from the inside before the enemy even fired a shot. That night the wind carried strange sounds, not the familiar moan of weather across the wire, not the distant crack of rock slides, but faint clicks, soft pulses in the radio static. She sat alone in the operations center, the others long gone to restless sleep, her fingers moving across the legacy systems no one else touched. The signal wasn't random. It was a call and response. Someone inside the base had keyed their mic twice, just twice, long enough for a distant signal to answer. She leaned back in her chair, the pale glow of the screen reflected in her washed-out blue eyes. So it wasn't just sabotage, it was communication. Someone was feeding the enemy in real time. By dawn she had a plan. Not one she voiced, not one she wrote, a plan she carried silently, like a knife kept hidden until the moment mattered. At breakfast, she sat at the far end of the mess hall as she always did. Soldiers filtered in, grabbing trays, moving through the ritual. She watched them not for what they did but for what they avoided. The way one private kept glancing at the exit, as if measuring distance. The way a corporal laughed too loudly, voice forced, eyes never meeting anyone's. The way a mechanic's boots were caked with fresh mud, though he hadn't been on rotation the night before. Small things, tiny fractures. None of them proved guilt. All of them proved something else. The base was unraveling. Thorne confronted her mid-morning, his jaw set, frustration leaking through every word. "Ma'am, with respect, sitting in corners and staring at people isn't enough. We need to start pulling people in, interrogating them. Lock this place down before someone else dies." She studied him quietly. Interrogations breed fear. Fear breeds mistakes. Mistakes breed more graves. Thorne clenched his fists. "Then what? Just wait until they burn us out from the inside." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "We don't need fear, we need truth. And truth doesn't shout, it waits." Thorne cursed under his breath and stormed out. But even as he left, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Because somewhere deep down, he knew she was right. That evening, Rossi found her near the wire. The younger woman's face was pale, her hands trembling as she held a small object wrapped in cloth. I found this," Rossi whispered, unwrapping it. "Explosives, a detonator, carefully hidden inside the casing of a broken radio." Her chest tightened. Rossi was shaking, fear in her voice. "It was in the comms bay where I work. Someone's trying to frame me." For the first time, emotion flickered across her calm face. Not surprise, not anger. Sadness. "They're not framing you," she said softly. "They're testing you to see if you'll break under suspicion." Rossi's eyes welled. "What do I do?" "Nothing, say nothing. Keep working, they want you scared. Don't give them the satisfaction." She tucked the cloth back into Rossi's hands and closed the young corporal's fingers over it. "And keep this hidden. The time will come to reveal it. Not now." That night she walked the perimeter again, her shadow stretching long under the harsh floodlights. She thought of Rossi's trembling hands, of Thorne's frustration, of the young guard who had almost stepped on a buried charge. She thought of the enemy in the mountains, patient, waiting, and of the enemy inside, patient too, feeding the storm. The greatest danger wasn't the bullet you saw. It was the hesitation before you pulled the trigger. And hesitation was spreading through the fob like infection. 3 nights later, the infection nearly killed them all. The sirens wailed just before dawn. Mortars screamed from the mountains, raining fire on the eastern wall. Soldiers scrambled from bunks, some half-dressed, some clutching weapons with shaking hands. Explosions tore through the dust, collapsing one of the guard towers. Madsen barked orders through the chaos. "Counter-battery, get me those guns up now." But the guns never fired. The fire control systems were dead, power lines severed, backup relays disabled. Not by the enemy outside. By the hands inside. She was already moving, past the chaos, past the shouts, past the smoke, into the narrow hallway of the operations center where the servers hummed. And there she caught it. A shadow moving where it shouldn't. A figure bent low, hands inside an open panel, a spark of wires, a smell of burning insulation. "Stop," she said. The figure froze, turned, a face she recognized, too familiar, too trusted. For a moment the base's chaos fell away. Only silence hung between them. The trader's eyes flicked, desperate, calculating. And in that second she knew the truth. It wasn't about size, or age, or respect. It was about the choice every soldier carried, loyalty or betrayal. And someone had already made their choice. The world narrowed to that small room, to the pale glow of the server racks, to the stillness of her own breath. The base outside screamed with fire, but here it was silent. Too silent. Because the ghost had found her prey. How do you face betrayal when it wears a familiar face? The server room smelled of ozone and burning wire. The faint hum of machines was almost drowned by the roar of mortars outside, the frantic shouts echoing through the base. But here, in the glow of screens, everything narrowed to stillness. She stood in the doorway. The figure at the open panel froze, shoulders tensing, hand hovering above the wires. Slowly, deliberately, he turned. It wasn't a stranger. It was a soldier she'd seen at breakfast, someone who had nodded at her in passing, who had shared a table with Tanaka, who had once laughed at one of Thorne's crude jokes. Familiar, forgettable. And that was the danger. Betrayal didn't always wear malice on its face. Sometimes it hid in the ordinary, the overlooked. Their eyes locked. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. Not a man caught in the act, but one who had already accepted the line he'd crossed. "Neither should you," she replied softly. His jaw tightened. "They've already won, Vance. You can feel it, can't you? Every crack in this place, every soldier doubting the man next to him. All I did was speed up what's inevitable." The words landed heavy, not just as excuse but as conviction. "Why?" she asked. He didn't flinch. "Because the war isn't worth dying for. Because out there in those mountains they have time, they have patience, and patience beats firepower. You know it better than anyone. You taught us that, didn't you? The only way to survive is to pick the winning side before the knife comes down." She stepped closer, her eyes pale in the flickering light. "Survival without loyalty is just another kind of death," she murmured. He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Easy for you to say, you're a ghost. You've already lived your wars, but these kids, Tanaka, Rossi, they'll be bones in a ravine. And for what? Orders barked by men who don't even remember their names." His voice cracked, a fracture in the conviction. And she heard it, the tremor of fear beneath the argument. Not ideology, not politics, fear. The most dangerous motive of all. Outside, another mortar screamed. The ground trembled. Shouts rose, weapons fired into the night. But here in the server room, time slowed. She stepped closer still, until only a foot of space separated them. "You betrayed them," she said, her voice low, each word deliberate. "Not because you believed in anything, not because you chose the winning side. You betrayed them because you were afraid, and fear is the worst leader of all." His hand twitched toward the pistol at his hip. Her knife flashed faster, a single precise motion. The blade pressed against his throat, steady, controlled. His eyes widened, breath hitching. "Finish it," he hissed. "You've killed before, just one more. You don't even have to explain." But she didn't move. The knife stayed poised, still unshaking. And in the silence, she spoke the truth she had carried for decades. "Killing is easy. Living with what you've done, that's the hard part." She withdrew the blade, stepping back. The soldier exhaled, confusion breaking his mask. "Why?" The door burst open. Thorne stormed in, rifle raised, Rossi on his heels. They froze at the sight, the traitor cornered, the knife still in her hand. Thorne's eyes hardened. "Move, ma'am, I'll end this right now." She didn't move. "No," she said, "he faces judgment, alive." The traitor snarled, struggling as Rossi restrained him, spitting curses, shouting promises of what was coming. But beneath the noise there was only one truth left. His usefulness was over. And she had chosen restraint, not blood. Because justice wasn't the same as vengeance. Hours later the base still smoldered. Fires extinguished, wounded carried to the medic's tent, silence settling where chaos had reigned. The traitor sat bound under guard, awaiting transport. Colonel Madsen approached her, exhaustion lining his face. "You should have let Thorne finish it," he said bluntly. "Men like that, they rot everything they touch." She met his eyes, Killing him would have been easy, too easy. His betrayal isn't just his own, it's a mirror, a reminder of how close we all come to breaking. Madsen studied her, frustration warring with reluctant understanding. He nodded once, grimly. But the betrayal had left scars deeper than flames or shrapnel. In the mess, soldiers whispered louder now, not about her, but about each other. Eyes lingered too long, measuring, weighing. Trust had splintered. Tanaka approached her late one evening, his face tight, voice low. "Ma'am, how do you know who to trust anymore?" She paused before answering, watching the horizon where night swallowed the mountains. "You don't," she said. "Not with words, not with oaths. You trust in actions, in the ones who keep walking when the ground is hardest, the ones who don't need to tell you they'll stand, they just do." Tanaka nodded slowly, carrying the weight of her words. The days that followed were tense, patrols doubled, watches lengthened, sleep grew scarce. The base was braced for the next blow, every man and woman waiting for it. And when it came, it was not fire from the mountains. It was silence. Communications died again, this time without jamming. Power flickered, then failed across half the fob. Generators that had been inspected twice still sputtered and failed. It was no longer sabotage. It was pressure, the enemy tightening the noose. She stood at the tactical map, tracing routes with a steady hand. "They're pushing us toward isolation," she said quietly. "Cutting comms, cutting power, making us deaf and blind until the moment they move. They want us to break ourselves before they even strike." Her words chilled the room, because they all knew she was right. Colonel Madsen turned to her, weary but resolute. "So what do we do?" She looked at the men and women around the table, faces strained, eyes hollow, soldiers on the edge of breaking. And she knew the truth. What they needed wasn't firepower, wasn't reinforcements. It was faith. Faith that someone could still see clearly in the dark. That night, as the fob sank into uneasy silence, she walked the wall again. The mountains loomed, patient, waiting. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate, her breath steady, every shadow, every flicker of movement measured and catalogued. And she thought of the traitor sitting bound in the guardhouse, of Rossi's trembling hands, of Tanaka's quiet question, of Thorne's simmering anger slowly reshaped into discipline. And she thought of the truth she had told him. Living with what you've done, that's the hardest part. It was the truth of war. And it was the truth that would decide whether this base survived the storm that hadn't yet arrived. What does a siege feel like before the first bullet flies? It feels like silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start to wonder if you've gone deaf. The mountains loomed unmoving, but something inside them had shifted. Patrols reported fewer skirmishes. Intercepts grew thinner. Even the enemy's scattered mortar fire had gone quiet. And that was the worst sign of all. Because silence was never mercy, it was preparation. She stood at the tactical table, hands resting lightly on its edge. Around her, Madsen, Thorne, Rossi, Tanaka, and a half-dozen other weary officers leaned in. The map glowed in dim light, showing supply routes that no longer existed, comms that no longer worked, and a base running on fumes. "They've cut us off," Madsen said flatly. "No resupply, no air cover. Command's answer is to hold position until reinforced." Reinforced by who? Reinforced when? No one answered. They all knew what silence from higher command meant. No one was coming. "They want us blind and starved," she said quietly. "And when we're brittle enough, they'll break us." Her voice wasn't loud, but it drew every gaze. Even now, in this room of rank and power, it was her calm that anchored them. Thorne clenched his jaw. "So we just sit here waiting to die?" "No," she replied, pale eyes steady. "We sit here waiting to endure." The words hung strange in the air. Endure, not win, not charge, endure. It sounded too small, too passive. And yet, as she said it, something inside them shifted. because it wasn't a promise of victory, it was a promise of survival. That night she walked the wall again. Soldiers nodded to her as she passed, some faintly, some with the stiffness of reverence. She neither encouraged nor discouraged it. Respect wasn't what she wanted. Awareness was. She stopped near the sector where the wire had once sagged, where she had found the planted charge. The fence gleamed faintly in moonlight, freshly reinforced. A young soldier stood watch, shoulders tight, eyes darting into the black. His rifle trembled ever so slightly. She walked up beside him, resting her hands on the wall. "What do you hear?" she asked softly. He blinked. "Nothing, ma'am." "Listen again." He swallowed, straining, silent, only silence. "That's what fear sounds like," she murmured. "Not shouting, not gunfire, just the quiet before." His breath quickened. "So it's coming." "Yes," she said, "and so are you. Remember this quiet. It will make the noise easier to bear." The boy nodded, his trembling slowing. She left him steadier than she found him. Days bled into one another. Food rations tightened. Soldiers grew gaunt. Tempers flared at the smallest things. Rossi worked herself raw, keeping comms patched with duct tape and prayers. Tanaka spent hours drilling his squad in silence and movement, imitating the lessons she had given him. Thorne no longer mocked, no longer barked out of pride. His voice now was iron, trimmed of ego. And she kept walking, kept watching, kept saying little but enough. Everywhere she went, she became the still point in the storm. The siege began quietly. The first real sign wasn't fire or gunshots, it was absence. A patrol that never returned, a listening post that went silent, a supply cache that should have been safe but was stripped bare when a team finally reached it. Then at dusk on the fourth day, the first true strike came. Mortars again, but heavier this time, more coordinated. They slammed the perimeter, choking the fob in fire and dust. Soldiers dove for cover, shouting, returning fire blind into the mountains. In the TOC, red lights flared across every screen. "Sector Alpha breach," a voice shouted. "They're testing the wire." Madsen snapped commands. Thorne barked orders. Rossi fought to keep a channel alive. And in the center of it she stood still, listening, watching. The enemy was loud, but their pattern was not chaos. She could feel it, the rhythm of probing, feints, withdrawals. They weren't attacking to win tonight. They were attacking to measure. She leaned toward Madsen. "They're not coming in, not yet. They want us burning ammo, burning nerves. Hold the line, but don't chase them. Save your strength." Madsen hesitated, then nodded. Orders shifted. The defense became measured, restrained. And just like that, lives were spared. Because she could see the storm for what it was. Not the main force, but the opening note. Afterward, the base reeled in smoke and exhaustion. Dozens wounded. Supplies dwindling further. Fear settling deeper. In the med tent, she sat beside Private Miller, the soldier she had carried from the ravines. His leg was bound, fevered, his eyes clouded. "Why do they keep coming?" he whispered weakly. "Why don't they just finish us?" She brushed a strand of dust from his forehead. Her voice was quiet, almost tender. "Because breaking a man quickly is easy. Breaking him slowly, that's war." His eyes closed, tears slipping into the dirt. She stayed until his breathing steadied, then stood, shoulders heavy with more than exhaustion. Later, under a sky riddled with stars that felt impossibly close and impossibly cold, she sat alone on a crate near the wire, her whetstone in hand, running the blade of her knife across it with steady rhythm. She thought of the traitor bound under guard, of Rossi's haunted eyes, of Tanaka's quiet discipline, of Thorne's anger tempered into something resembling respect. She thought of herself, of the name they whispered now, Wraith, dragged out of the shadows she'd once left behind. And she wondered if ghosts could ever really stop haunting. At dawn, the mountains were quiet again, too quiet. And she knew the enemy was close, closer than they had ever been. The siege wasn't coming. It had already begun. Why did the mountains go silent just before dawn? Not the restless quiet of waiting, not the thin hush of wind scraping across stone. This was heavier, absolute, the kind of silence that pressed against lungs and made men hold their breath without knowing why. She felt it before the first shot came. Standing on the western wall, pale eyes fixed on the ridgelines, she saw nothing but darkness, and yet her hand closed tighter around the railing. "They're here," she whispered. A heartbeat later, the valley lit with fire. Mortars screamed from 3 directions at once, slamming into the fob with shattering force. Towers cracked. Barracks collapsed. The air filled with choking dust, with shouts and gunfire and the high-pitched wail of wounded men. "Contact multiple sectors," Rossi's voice cracked over the failing comms. "We've got breaches north and east." The enemy had come in waves, shadows spilling from the ravines, disciplined, ruthless. The probes were over. This was the strike. Colonel Madsen barked orders, his voice hoarse but unyielding. Thorne rallied squads to choke points, bullets rattling into the night. Tanaka moved like a shadow, leading young soldiers through smoke, his lessons from her carrying them through. And she didn't shout. She didn't run. She moved with terrifying calm, flowing from position to position, her presence enough to steady the men whose hands shook too hard to aim. At the breach on the northern fence, enemy fighters poured through the wire. The defenders faltered. Ammunition low, fear higher. She stepped into the gap. Not larger than life, not loud, just precise. Her carbine barked in short bursts, each shot placed with surgical calm. When her magazine ran dry, her knife spoke instead, silent, efficient, merciless. She moved not like a soldier, but like inevitability, every motion belonging to the chaos around her. Behind her the line held, because she held. Hours blurred into one another. The fob became a furnace. Fire and smoke, screams and silence, the smell of blood and dust and burning steel. She fought, but more than that, she guided. At the comms tent, where Rossi clutched broken equipment with bleeding hands, she knelt. "You don't need the whole system, just a pulse, enough to tell the world we're still breathing." Rossi blinked through tears, steadied, and kept working. At the barricade where Tanaka's squad faltered under sniper fire, she slid beside him. "Don't fight the silence. Use it, belong to it." The boy nodded, exhaled, and led his squad forward with steps measured, deliberate. Even Thorne, ragged and bloodied, found himself listening for her signals, trusting her calm as the only compass in the storm. By midday, the assault peaked. The fob shook with fury, its walls buckling but not broken. Bodies lay sprawled where lines had been tested and held. The enemy's patience had turned to rage. They threw themselves harder at the wire, reckless now, desperate to finish what they had begun. Colonel Madsen slammed a fist on the tactical table. "They'll break us if we don't push them back now." "No," she said firmly. Her voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the din. "They've already failed." Madsen turned furious. "Failed? Look at this place. We're burning." She shook her head slowly. "They wanted us divided, suspicious. They wanted us broken before they struck, but you're still standing. Thorne is still leading. Rossi is still fighting. Tanaka is still breathing. They didn't break us." Her pale eyes burned in the smoke. "They lost the moment we stopped doubting each other." Silence fell in the TOC, broken only by the rumble of gunfire outside. And Madsen understood. It wasn't about crushing the enemy. It was about refusing to let them crush what was inside. The afternoon dragged on. The fighting bled into exhaustion, but the fob endured. Line by line, wall by wall, breath by breath, they endured. By dusk, the mountains fell silent again. The enemy withdrew, leaving behind scorched ground and broken bodies, but no victory. The fob still stood. Barely. But it stood. As medics worked, as soldiers slumped against walls too tired to even speak, she walked the perimeter once more. Dusk clung to her skin. Blood, some hers, most not, stained her uniform. Her knife hung loose at her side, dull from overuse. She passed Tanaka, who looked up with hollow but steady eyes. He gave a slight nod. She returned it. She passed Rossi, hands trembling as she cradled a working comms unit, pride hidden beneath exhaustion. She laid a hand briefly on the young corporal's shoulder. She passed Thorne, bandaged, limping but alive. He saluted her without a word. For once his eyes held nothing but respect. And at the TOC, Colonel Madsen met her gaze. No dismissal now, no doubt, only gratitude he couldn't voice. She didn't need the words. That night, as the stars burned above and the fob lay bruised but breathing, she sat alone on the wall. Her battered copy of Marcus Aurelius rested in her lap, unopened. She didn't need its words tonight. She carried her own. She thought of the traitor, now silent forever, of the soldiers she had steadied, of the faces she had watched shift from doubt to belief. She thought of the silence that had nearly broken them, and of the noise that had failed to. And when dawn came, painting the mountains gold, she rose, her small frame silhouetted against a world scarred but alive. She didn't smile, she didn't weep, she simply stood. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.